One ancient mummy holds a secret that could rewrite the history of medicine. This is not just another artifact. It is a profound challenge to our entire understanding of ancient healing. By the end of this journey, you will see the hard evidence that could overturn centuries of established history. We will uncover the shocking medical procedure performed on this individual and explore why experts are calling it impossible for its time. How much of our past remains hidden in plain sight? The dust of the Egyptian desert had barely settled when a team of archaeologists made a find that would quietly upend everything. It was the early 20th century, in a long-forgotten tomb complex near the ancient city of Thebes. The team, led by a meticulous British Egyptologist, was not prepared for the individual they found. While other mummies in the chamber were arranged with traditional reverence, this one was different. The body was not of a pharaoh or a high priest, but the initial examination of the burial goods suggested a person of some importance, perhaps a scribe or a mid-level official. What caught the team's attention immediately was the exceptional state of preservation. The wrappings were intact, but it was the subtle, unnatural shape of the torso beneath the linen that provided the first clue. The chest cavity seemed oddly compressed, almost reshaped, a detail that did not align with any known mummification practices. The initial hypothesis was straightforward: a high-status individual who had died from a traumatic injury, perhaps a fall or an accident. They assumed the body's strange form was a result of that fatal incident, a theory that seemed to hold for decades, but that assumption was about to be proven completely and utterly wrong. Decades later, this quiet mystery from the tomb would get a second life. The mummy was carefully transported to a state-of-the-art medical facility for a computed tomography scan, a process that uses X-rays to create a detailed three-dimensional image. Researchers expected to see the typical skeletal structure, perhaps confirming that old theory of a crushing injury. What appeared on the screen instead was a medical paradox. The images revealed a series of precise, straight cuts on the ribs, cuts that were too clean and too deliberate to be from any accident. They were surgical in nature. Even more baffling was the evidence of advanced bone disease, a condition so severe it should have been completely debilitating, yet the bone showed clear signs of healing. This individual had not only survived a complex and invasive procedure, but they had lived for a significant time with a sickness that, by all historical accounts, should have been a death sentence in ancient Egypt. The core mystery was now undeniable. How could such advanced medical knowledge exist thousands of years before we believed it was possible? Who was the healer capable of this, and what was the true story behind the patient on the table? The computed tomography scan presented a biological riddle, but the answer lay buried in time itself. To understand the true scale of this discovery, researchers first had to answer a fundamental question. When exactly did this person live? Carbon dating of the linen wrappings and a small bone sample provided a stunningly precise answer. This individual walked the earth during the Old Kingdom, around 4,600 years ago. This places their life squarely in the age when the Great Pyramids of Giza were being constructed, a period we often associate with monumental architecture, not advanced surgical medicine. The tomb's artifacts confirmed this timeline. The pottery styles, the hieroglyphic inscriptions, even the specific type of resin used in the mummification process, all pointed to this incredibly ancient date. This context is what makes the medical evidence so deeply revolutionary. For centuries, our history books have told us that complex surgical procedures, especially those involving the chest cavity, were a product of much later civilizations. The Hippocratic corpus from ancient Greece, written over 2,000 years later, was considered a foundational text of Western medicine. Yet here was clear proof of a successful, invasive operation taking place 2 full millennia before Hippocrates was even born. Think about that for a moment. This is not a difference of a few hundred years, it is a gap of thousands. It suggests an entire school of medical knowledge, a lineage of healers and their techniques, that flourished and then vanished from the historical record, leaving only this single, silent witness. The timeline itself forces a monumental shift, pushing back the dawn of sophisticated surgery to an era we previously thought was only capable of basic remedies. So who was this patient who defied time and expectation? The most compelling evidence was not merely a healed fracture, but a complex cranial procedure. High-resolution scans revealed a series of small, perfectly circular holes drilled into the skull, a practice known as trepanation. This was not a haphazard or ritualistic act. The edges of the bone were smooth and showed clear signs of new growth, meaning the individual lived for a long time after the operation. The precision of these boreholes is what defies all expectation. Each one was placed with an intimate knowledge of cranial anatomy, skillfully avoiding major blood vessels and sensitive areas of the brain that, if nicked, would have caused immediate death or severe disability. Think of the steady hand required to drill into the hardest bone in the human body with such control, using only flint or copper tools available in that era. It would be like trying to perform microsurgery with a basic hammer and chisel, yet the evidence proves it was done, and done successfully. This was not an act of desperation, it was a calculated medical intervention. The patient suffered from a condition, perhaps a severe head injury or a debilitating illness that caused pressure on the brain, and this operation was their only hope. The fact they survived tells us the healer possessed not only remarkable technical skill, but also a profound understanding of post-operative care, including the management of pain and the prevention of infection in a world without antibiotics. This single skull presents a paradox that challenges our entire timeline. We are looking at a level of surgical sophistication that, according to our history books, should not appear for another 2,000 years. So who possessed this forbidden knowledge, and where did it come from? Our understanding of ancient Egyptian medicine comes primarily from a handful of precious texts. The most famous of these is the Ebers Papyrus, a sprawling scroll dating from around 1550 before the Common Era. This document is a vast compilation of medical knowledge, listing over 700 magical spells and herbal remedies for everything from crocodile bites to intestinal parasites. It describes how to dress wounds with honey, a natural antiseptic, and how to use willow bark to alleviate pain, a primitive form of aspirin. We also have the Edwin Smith Papyrus, which details a more practical, surgical approach to treating wounds, fractures, and dislocations. It reads like a modern medical textbook, moving methodically from the head down the body. These texts paint a picture of a medical system that was remarkably advanced for its time, yet still bound by a deep belief in magic and the supernatural. Illness was often thought to be caused by demons or the wrath of the gods, and a physician's toolkit contained as many incantations as it did practical remedies. Surgery, as we understand it, was generally limited to the surface of the body. They could set broken bones, drain abscesses, and even perform a basic form of circumcision, but the historical record suggested they never dared to open the chest cavity or perform intricate procedures on the skull. The prevailing wisdom was that their knowledge of human anatomy was too limited, their tools too crude. Copper and flint blades were excellent for making external incisions, but the idea of using them for the precise, life-saving work seen in our mummy was considered a historical impossibility. This established narrative creates a clear and comfortable timeline. First came the Egyptians with their herbal mixes and basic bone setting. Then, much later, the Greeks like Hippocrates laid the philosophical groundwork for rational medicine. And finally, many centuries after that, true surgery emerged. The discovery in this tomb shatters that comfortable progression entirely, revealing a hidden chapter of expertise that existed long before the papyri were even written. The procedure revealed by the scans was a precise and invasive form of cranial surgery. This was not a single quick drill hole. The evidence shows a multi-step operation that began with the careful shaving of the scalp to expose the skull. Using a sharpened instrument, likely a bow drill tipped with a hard stone like flint, the surgeon would have begun the most perilous phase. They applied a steady, rotating pressure to create a series of small, interconnected perforations, essentially carving a window into the living bone. The goal was to remove a rectangular section of the skull, a process called craniotomy, to relieve catastrophic pressure on the brain. Every single movement in this operation was fraught with risk. The surgeon needed an intimate, three-dimensional understanding of the brain's anatomy, knowing exactly where the major arteries, the meninges, lay just beneath the bone. A slip of the hand by even a single millimeter could have severed one of these vessels, causing fatal bleeding in a matter of moments. The bone dust had to be cleared away without pushing fragments into the delicate brain tissue beneath. This was a painstaking, slow, and terrifyingly delicate operation. The fact that the bone shows such clean, healed edges is the ultimate proof of success. It means the surgeon not only navigated these dangers flawlessly, but they also managed the recovery. They would have had to control bleeding with pressure and perhaps natural coagulants, fashion a clean dressing from linen to protect the open site from infection, and manage the patient's pain through a long and difficult healing process. This level of sophisticated surgical aftercare is something we simply do not attribute to this period. This is not first aid. It is a calculated, life-saving neurosurgical intervention performed thousands of years before anesthesia or sterile operating rooms. Experts are baffled because this single mummy demonstrates a complete medical protocol that should not exist for another 2 millennia. The knowledge required simply does not fit on our historical timeline. Such a radical claim naturally invites a healthy dose of skepticism. The most immediate question is a simple one. Could this be a clever forgery or the result of modern contamination? Perhaps a well-meaning archaeologist from a century ago accidentally damaged the remains, or worse, someone deliberately altered the mummy to create a sensational headline. Scientists confronted these doubts with a battery of rigorous tests. They analyzed the edges of the bone under high-powered microscopes, searching for any microscopic striations or tool marks that would match modern steel scalpels or surgical drills. What they found was definitive. The cut marks showed the characteristic rough, almost shattered pattern left by ancient stone tools, not the clean, sharp grooves of modern metal. Furthermore, the healing process observed in the bone is something that cannot be faked. New bone growth, called callus, forms in a very specific biological sequence over weeks and months. The intricate latticework of healed bone surrounding the surgical site was seamlessly integrated with the rest of the skull, proving the body itself was alive and actively repairing for a long period after the procedure. This is a biological signature that is impossible to replicate on a centuries-old skeleton. The evidence locked within the bone itself points to only one conclusion. This was an operation performed on a living person in the distant past, and their body's own healing process is the ultimate authentication. The deeper scientists looked, the more incredible the story became. Micro-computed tomography scans, a technology that creates three-dimensional images at a microscopic level, allowed researchers to virtually peel back the layers of time. They were no longer just looking at the bone, they were examining its very cellular history. What they discovered locked in the mineral matrix was a chronicle of survival. The scans revealed minute, hairline fractures radiating from the edges of the surgical site, a clear indicator that the bone was still flexible and living when the procedure was performed. A dead, dry skull would have simply shattered under such pressure. This was definitive proof that the patient was alive and under some form of support or restraint during the operation. Even more telling was the evidence of long-term biological negotiation between the skull and the surgical opening. The body had not merely healed, it had worked for years to remodel the bone, slowly smoothing the sharp, cut edges created by the ancient surgeon's tool. This is a process that takes many months, a quiet, continuous project of the human body to reinforce and strengthen an area of profound weakness. It speaks of a life that continued long after the terrifying ordeal was over. The patient likely lived for years, perhaps even decades, carrying this window in their skull as a testament to a medical skill we are only now beginning to comprehend. This leaves us with a profound and practical question. What kind of instruments could possibly achieve such delicate, life-saving work? The cut marks on the bone are our only physical witness to the tools themselves. When analyzed under magnification, the microscopic striations reveal a tool that was incredibly hard, capable of making a clean, controlled cut without shattering the bone. For a long time, historians believed the Egyptians had only soft copper and brittle flint at their disposal. Copper is malleable, it bends and dulls quickly, seeming utterly inadequate for the task of cutting through human bone. Flint, while sharp, is prone to chipping and cannot be resharpened with the precision of a metal blade. So how did they do it? The answer may force us to reconsider ancient Egyptian metallurgy entirely. We know that by the Old Kingdom, they were already experimenting with alloying copper with other metals, creating a harder, more durable substance known as arsenical copper. This material could be hammered and sharpened to a much finer, stronger edge. It is not a great leap to suggest that a master craftsperson, working for a master surgeon, could have produced specialized, razor-sharp blades from such an alloy, tools fine enough to navigate the complex architecture of the human skull. Perhaps the toolkit also included finely serrated saws made from copper with embedded abrasive sands to increase their cutting power, functioning like primitive versions of our modern bone saws. The bow drill used for the trepanation was likely a sophisticated device, not a simple hand tool. It would have required a stable central post, a weighted spindle for momentum, and a drill bit made from a precious, exceptionally hard stone like obsidian or jasper. This was not a tool for rough carpentry. It was a precision medical instrument. The very existence of these marks suggests a level of tool-making sophistication we have barely begun to appreciate. We have been looking at the grand statues and the gold masks, but perhaps the true pinnacle of their engineering was not in the monuments they left for the gods, but in the tiny, delicate blades they used to save a single human life. But the surgical skill itself is only one part of this ancient mystery. A procedure this invasive and prolonged would have been agonizing, an unbearable torture that no person could endure while fully conscious. This leads to a haunting question: what did the healer use to dull the pain? Recent chemical analysis of the mummy's tissues has provided a stunning clue. Traces of specific alkaloid compounds were detected, residues that match the known pain-relieving properties of the opium poppy and the powerful sedative mandrake root. We know from later papyri that the Egyptians were aware of these plants. The Ebers Papyrus mentions using a mixture of ground poppy seeds in water to stop a crying child, a primitive but effective sedative. They understood that mandrake, a plant with a forked root that vaguely resembles a human form, could induce a deep, trance-like state. But the prevailing historical view was that these were used for minor ailments or in religious rituals, not as a sophisticated anesthetic cocktail for major surgery. The evidence clinging to this mummy suggests something far more advanced. It points to the possibility that the healer possessed a precise, almost pharmaceutical understanding of dosage. They would have had to calculate just enough of these potent herbs to plunge the patient into a state of deep unconsciousness, but not so much that it would stop their heart or breathing. This was not a simple herbal tea. It was a carefully calibrated anesthetic, a necessary key that unlocked the possibility of performing such a delicate and terrifying operation. Imagine the knowledge required to combine these powerful, potentially lethal plants into a life-saving tool. It transforms the image of the healer from a skilled craftsman with a blade into a master chemist, a forerunner of the anesthesiologist, working in the shadow of the pyramids. This single mummy's survival does not just challenge our view of Egypt, it stands completely apart from the entire ancient world. Around the same time this individual was undergoing complex cranial surgery, other great civilizations were developing their own medical traditions. In Mesopotamia, the diagnostic handbook written on clay tablets shows physicians meticulously interpreting symptoms as messages from angry gods. A patient's illness was often seen as divine punishment, and treatment involved elaborate rituals to appease the deities, even though they possessed practical skills like setting bones. In China, the foundations of acupuncture and herbal medicine were being laid, focusing on balancing the body's energy flows. These were profound systems of thought, but they largely avoided the kind of invasive, physical intervention we see evidence of in this Egyptian tomb. Even ancient Greece, whose Hippocratic tradition would much later be hailed as the birthplace of rational medicine, initially explained disease through imbalances in the four bodily humors, not through precise anatomical surgery. Every one of these cultures possessed remarkable medical knowledge, yet they all operated within a framework where the physical body and the spiritual world were deeply intertwined. The procedure performed on our mummy is different in kind, not just in degree. It is a starkly physical, mechanical solution to a biological crisis. It demonstrates a willingness to open the human body and fix a problem directly, a concept that would not become mainstream in the West for thousands of years. This makes ancient Egypt not merely an equal participant in early medicine, but a startling outlier. While its contemporaries were developing complex spiritual and philosophical systems for healing, the evidence locked in this skull suggests that somewhere along the Nile, a healer possessed a shockingly modern, hands-on understanding of the body as a machine that could be repaired. Why did this particular approach emerge here? And why did such an advanced surgical tradition seemingly vanish without a trace, leaving this one mummy as its only known beneficiary? The surgical precision we see in this mummy stands in stark contrast to the world of spirits and incantations we typically associate with Egyptian medicine. This forces us to confront a complex duality. The Egyptian healer, or SWNW, operated in a realm where a broken bone could be set with a splint, while a priest recited a spell to bone demon. Illness was rarely just a physical ailment, it was a symptom of a spiritual imbalance, an invasion by a malevolent force, or a divine message. The Ebers Papyrus itself prescribes a remedy for a foreign object in the flesh that involves applying a dressing of worm blood and donkey dung, all while chanting a specific incantation to draw the object out. This was the accepted, public face of healing, a harmonious blend of the practical and the mystical. So where does a clean, rational cranial surgery fit into this worldview? It does not, at least not comfortably. The existence of this successful operation suggests something revolutionary, a hidden school of thought that prioritized direct physical intervention over spiritual negotiation. Perhaps within the inner sanctums of the temple, or in the private service of the elite, there existed a class of healers who had, through repeated trial and observation, begun to see the body in a different light. They may have still paid lip service to the gods, but their hands worked with a confidence that came from empirical knowledge. They had seen that pressure on the brain caused specific symptoms, and they had learned that relieving that pressure could reverse those symptoms, regardless of which demon was supposedly responsible. This mummy is not necessarily evidence that they rejected magic, but that they had developed a parallel, hands-on tradition so effective it could save a life where incantations alone would have failed. The patient on the table did not need a spell to survive the opening of their skull. They needed a steady hand, a sharp blade, and a deep understanding of anatomy. This discovery hints at a secret history of medicine, one where observation and result quietly trumped tradition and prayer, long before the scientific method gave it a name. Who was the hand behind the blade, the mind that conceived such an operation? This question pushes us beyond the bones and into the very fabric of ancient society. The person who performed this surgery was not merely a physician, they were a master of their craft, possessing a rare combination of anatomical knowledge, manual dexterity, and profound courage. In a civilization where titles were everything, what was theirs? The most common term for a doctor was SWNW, a general practitioner who blended herbal remedies with magical spells. But this procedure feels far beyond the scope of a typical SWNW. It suggests the existence of a specialist, a kind of ancient neurosurgeon whose skills were so advanced they were likely reserved for the highest echelons of society, perhaps even the royal court itself. Their training would have been a long and secretive apprenticeship, passed down through generations within a specific family or a closed guild. Imagine the years spent not just memorizing papyrus scrolls, but practicing incisions on animal cadavers, studying the anatomy of fallen laborers, and learning to mix sedatives with the precision of an apothecary. This healer would have understood the body in a way that transcended the typical spiritual explanations. They knew that a physical problem required a physical solution, a philosophy that seems startlingly modern. Were they also a priest? It is possible, as medicine and religion were deeply intertwined. But the evidence of their work suggests their true faith was placed in observation and result. They were likely a hybrid figure, a respected elder who could recite the proper incantations to satisfy tradition, while their hands performed a miracle of rational science. This individual represents a forgotten class of healer, one whose empirical knowledge was so powerful it remained a closely guarded secret, leaving behind only this single, silent patient as proof they ever existed at all. The bones tell a silent, eloquent story of a life lived under extraordinary duress. Forensic analysis reveals this was a man, likely in his late 30s or early 40s at the time of his death, a respectable age for such an ancient era. His skeleton shows the subtle markers of a privileged but demanding existence. The robust attachments for muscles in his shoulders and right arm hint at years of repetitive activity, perhaps the meticulous work of a high-ranking scribe or an overseer of construction projects, someone who spent his life holding tools and giving orders. Yet this privileged status could not shield him from a devastating health crisis. Long before the surgical intervention, he suffered from a chronic and painful condition. The vertebrae in his spine show significant degeneration and arthritic lipping, a sign of persistent inflammation and discomfort that would have made every movement a conscious effort. But the true catalyst for the surgery was found in his skull. A faint, healed fracture line, almost invisible to the untrained eye, radiates from the precise site of the operation. This is the ghost of the original trauma, the event that set his fate in motion. He likely suffered a severe blow to the head, perhaps from a falling object at a work site or an accident involving transport. The impact would have caused a subdural hematoma, a dangerous pooling of blood between the brain and the skull. Think of the symptoms he would have endured. Debilitating headaches that felt like a vise tightening around his head, episodes of confusion and dizziness, a slow weakening on one side of his body, and eventually, a terrifying loss of consciousness. This was not a simple injury one could sleep off. It was a ticking time bomb inside his cranium, a mounting pressure that was slowly crushing his brain and leading him toward certain death. His community and his healer were faced with a stark choice: let him die or attempt the impossible. The decision to proceed with the surgery speaks volumes about his value to his society. The immense risk, the resources required, the sheer audacity of the procedure, all suggest he was a person deemed worth saving at any cost. He was not just a patient, he was a father, a husband, a vital member of his community, whose life was precious enough to justify a leap into a medical unknown. This single skull presents a direct challenge to the very foundations of medical history. For generations, we have been taught a clear and compelling story, one that begins in the sun-drenched courtyards of ancient Greece. It is a narrative that credits Hippocrates, who lived around 400 years before the Common Era, as the father of rational medicine. His famous oath established a new ethical code, separating the healer from the priest and insisting that disease came from natural causes, not the whims of the gods. Centuries later, the physician Galen would build upon this foundation, his anatomical theories dominating Western medicine for over a millennium. Their collective legacy is immense, forming the bedrock of our entire medical tradition. But the mummy from the Old Kingdom silently refutes this timeline. This individual lived and was successfully operated on more than 2,000 years before Hippocrates was even born. That is not a small gap, it is a chasm. It suggests that the principles we attribute to the Greeks, the idea of observing the body logically and intervening directly, were not invented in Greece. They were being practiced and perfected along the Nile at a time when the Great Pyramids were still new. The Greek achievement was not one of invention, but perhaps of brilliant systematization and documentation, bringing ideas that already existed in the ancient world into a cohesive philosophical framework. This is not to diminish the profound contributions of Hippocrates and Galen, but to expand our understanding of where their wisdom ultimately came from. It forces us to ask a difficult question: have we been looking for the origins of medicine in the wrong place, and more importantly, in the wrong time? The discovery has sent shockwaves through the quiet halls of academia, splitting expert opinion right down the middle. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a prominent medical historian, voices the skepticism shared by many. She argues that while the evidence is compelling, a single anomaly cannot rewrite an entire historical narrative. Our understanding of Old Kingdom medicine is based on an overwhelming body of evidence from texts and countless other mummies that show no such interventions. To overturn that based on one individual, she cautions, is a dangerous precedent. It is the equivalent of finding a single smartphone in a medieval castle and declaring the entire society was digitally connected. The burden of proof, for her, remains immense. On the other side of the debate, you have figures like Professor Amir Hassan, an Egyptologist who has spent his career studying ancient technology. He counters that we have been guilty of underestimating the past, of forcing their achievements into our own comfortable timeline. He points out that we accept the architectural miracle of the pyramids, a feat we still cannot perfectly replicate, yet we balk at the idea of a single successful surgery. Why is one impossible and the other taken for granted? This is not about rewriting history with one find, he insists, but about finally listening to what a solitary piece of evidence has been screaming at us for centuries. Then there is the middle ground, occupied by researchers like Dr. Isabel Vance, a bioarchaeologist. Her position is one of cautious, electrified excitement. She agrees that we cannot throw out all our textbooks, but she also believes this mummy forces a crucial and long overdue conversation. Perhaps, she suggests, we have been looking for evidence of advanced medicine in all the wrong places. Our historical record is inherently biased, preserving the knowledge meant for papyrus but missing the hands-on, practical techniques that were considered trade secrets, passed orally from master to apprentice in a single lifetime. This mummy does not prove that every Egyptian was a neurosurgeon, but it does suggest that peak medical knowledge in that era was far higher than we ever documented. The debate is so heated precisely because the stakes are so high. For the skeptics, it is about protecting the integrity of the historical method from sensationalism. For the proponents, it is about freeing history from the constraints of our own assumptions. And caught in the middle is a 4,600-year-old patient, whose silent bones have ignited a modern war of ideas over the very nature of human progress. The very success of this surgery created a preservation paradox for the ages. How could such delicate evidence of bone healing survive intact for over 4,000 years? The answer lies in a remarkable fusion of human ingenuity and environmental perfection. The ancient Egyptians did not just bury their dead, they engineered a shield against time itself. The key was the mummification process, a chemical ballet performed with ritual precision. After the surgeon's incredible work was complete, the embalmers took over. They would have carefully removed the brain through the nose, a standard practice, but in this case, they took special care around the surgical site, preserving the healed bone as a testament to the individual's life. The body was then packed and covered with natron, a naturally occurring salt harvested from dry lake beds. This was not mere table salt. It was a powerful desiccant that slowly and evenly drew every ounce of moisture from the tissues. This dehydration process was absolutely critical. It stopped bacteria and enzymes in their tracks, preventing the decay that would have completely obliterated the subtle, healed edges of the bone. Without this chemical halt, the story of the surgery would have rotted away to dust within a generation. The arid climate of the Egyptian desert acted as a perfect, natural extension of this process. The relentless dry heat and low humidity created a stable environment where the natron-treated body could rest for millennia without being attacked by the fungi and microbes that thrive on moisture. Think of the desert as a vast, natural museum case, maintaining a constant state of preservation that locked the biological evidence in place. It is a profound irony that the very rituals intended to ensure spiritual immortality are what preserved the physical proof of a medical miracle. The embalmer's salts and the desert's breath worked in silent partnership, guarding a secret they could not possibly have understood, waiting for a future that could finally read the story written in bone. This mummy is not alone in its silent challenge to history. Across the globe, other enigmatic discoveries have surfaced, each one a stubborn piece that refuses to fit our established puzzle. Take, for instance, the Antikythera mechanism, a complex bronze gearwork device recovered from a 2,000-year-old Greek shipwreck. For decades, scholars dismissed it as an impossible object, a historical outlier too sophisticated for its time, until painstaking analysis revealed it was an intricate astronomical calculator, an ancient analog computer capable of predicting planetary movements and eclipses. Its existence suggests a lost lineage of Greek engineering that simply does not appear in the historical record. Or consider the massive, perfectly fitted stone walls at Sacsayhuaman in Peru, where enormous blocks weighing hundreds of tons are locked together with such precision that not even a razor blade can slide between them. The conventional narrative attributes this to Bronze Age technology, yet the construction methods remain a profound mystery, hinting at skills we have yet to fully comprehend. These are not just curiosities, they are profound anomalies. Each one, like our Egyptian mummy, stands as a quiet testament to a forgotten chapter of human capability. They collectively suggest that our timeline of technological and medical progress is not a smooth, unbroken upward curve, but a story with missing pages, with peaks of achievement that were reached, lost, and then independently rediscovered centuries or even millennia later. Why do these advanced examples appear as isolated flashes in the dark? Perhaps they represent the pinnacle of knowledge held by a small, elite class, techniques so specialized they vanished when that specific societal structure collapsed. Maybe they were the products of a single genius whose innovations died with them. Whatever the reason, this pattern of anomalous finds forces a humbling realization. Our past is not a neatly solved mystery, but a vast, dimly lit landscape where we have only just begun to trace the outlines. The story of this one healer and their patient is not an isolated fantasy. It is part of a much larger, more fascinating pattern of human history that we are only now learning to see. Of course, such a radical claim does not go unchallenged. The most compelling rebuttal from skeptics is a simple one. Why is this mummy so utterly alone? If this level of surgery was a known practice in the Old Kingdom, why have we found only one single example among the thousands of mummies examined? This is the argument from silence, and it carries significant weight. Critics argue that a true medical tradition would leave a trail of evidence, not a solitary, miraculous outlier. They point to the countless other mummies from this period that show only basic medical care, like set bones or pulled teeth. For every one of those, we see no evidence of complex cranial work. The statistical improbability, they say, is overwhelming. This was not a standard procedure, but a desperate, one-time fluke, a lucky survivor of what was almost certainly a fatal mistake. The healer got lucky, the patient was resilient, and we are mistaking a historical accident for a lost tradition. This is a powerful and logical point. How can we rewrite history based on a single data point that contradicts everything else we know? Supporters of the revolutionary interpretation have a direct counter to this. They argue that we are looking for evidence in the wrong places and with the wrong expectations. First, consider the patient pool. A procedure this dangerous and resource-intensive would have been reserved for the most elite members of society, a tiny fraction of the population. The vast majority of mummies we study are from later periods or of lower status. Second, and more importantly, success was the exception, not the rule. How many other patients died on the table? A failed surgery would leave a corpse with a gaping, unhealed hole in the skull, a body that would likely never be mummified with honor, or one that simply decomposed, leaving no trace at all. The very act of mummification itself filtered the evidence, preserving only the successes. This mummy is not proof that the procedure always worked, but that it was even attempted, and that on rare, brilliant occasions, it succeeded. Its uniqueness does not disprove its reality. It simply highlights how extraordinary the circumstances had to be for this evidence to survive the millennia. It is not a missing piece of a large puzzle, but the sole surviving relic of a secret, elite, and incredibly risky art. Another major point of contention revolves around the tools. Skeptics maintain that the available technology, even arsenical copper, was fundamentally insufficient for the fine, controlled work we see in the bone. They argue that replicative experiments show copper blades becoming dull and deformed after just a few incisions into bone. How could a surgeon complete an entire craniotomy with a tool that kept failing? The counterargument here is not about the metal alone, but about the entire operational technique. Supporters suggest we have been thinking like modern surgeons, assuming a single, scalpel-sharp blade was used from start to finish. The ancient healer's toolkit was likely far more diverse and adaptive. They might have used a series of specialized instruments, switching them out as they became dull. The initial incision could have been made with a fresh, sharp copper blade, while the finer work of connecting the drill holes might have been done with a bow drill using an abrasive paste of sand and water, essentially sanding through the bone with a durable, replaceable tip. This transforms the problem from one of metallurgy to one of logistics and skill. It suggests a healer who was also a master tool manager, working with a team that constantly maintained and supplied fresh, effective instruments throughout the long operation. The limitations of the material were not a barrier, but a challenge that was met with ingenuity and preparation. Perhaps the most human counterargument is about pain and infection. How could anyone survive the sheer agony and almost certain septic shock? Critics find it nearly impossible to believe that a patient could be rendered unconscious and kept still for hours with only primitive herbal sedatives, and that the open wound could then avoid fatal infection in a world without germ theory. This seems less like medicine and more like a miracle. The response from proponents turns this very point on its head. The patient's survival is not the flaw in the argument, it is the very core of the evidence. The healed bone is the ultimate data point. It proves unequivocally that the pain was managed enough for the patient to survive, and that the infection was controlled enough for the bone to heal. We may not fully understand their methods, but we cannot deny the result. Their knowledge of anesthetics may have been more sophisticated than the papyri reveal, involving precise combinations and delivery methods lost to us. Their understanding of cleanliness, while not based on microbes, was based on stark observation that certain practices, like using clean linen dressings and certain antiseptic resins, led to better outcomes. They achieved, through empirical trial and error, what we would later achieve through science. The mummy's survival is not a reason for disbelief, but the very reason we must believe that their practical knowledge far exceeded their theoretical explanations. This discovery forces us to reconsider the very nature of progress itself. For centuries, we have viewed the history of medicine as a straight, ascending line, a steady march from primitive superstition to modern scientific triumph. We place ourselves proudly at the pinnacle, looking back at a long, dark past we have finally escaped. But what if that line is not a clean, upward slope? What if it is more like a spiral, or even a series of peaks and valleys, where advanced knowledge is achieved, lost in some societal collapse, and then painstakingly rediscovered generations later? The existence of this mummy suggests that the capacity for profound medical insight is not a modern invention, but a recurring potential in the human mind. The real question is not whether they were as advanced as us, but why their specific brand of advanced knowledge did not accumulate and get passed down. Perhaps their greatest limitation was not their intellect, but their medium. Their knowledge was locked in fragile papyrus and the fragile chain of master-to-apprentice oral tradition, vulnerable to fire, flood, and the simple passage of time. Our own era's advantage may not be superior intelligence, but the durability of our records, from printed books to digital servers, that allow knowledge to survive across generations and build upon itself. This shifts the entire narrative from one of inherent superiority to one of fragile continuity. What if the ancient Egyptians, or some lost school within their culture, had discovered principles of aseptic surgery or neuroanatomy that we only confirmed in the last century? Their methods were different, born from different materials and a different worldview, but the fundamental logic of relieving cranial pressure to save a life is a truth that exists independently of time. This opens a tantalizing possibility. Could studying their forgotten approaches, their unique herbal anesthetics, or their specific bone-cutting techniques with primitive tools, actually inspire novel solutions for modern problems? Consider the field of battlefield medicine or disaster relief, where surgeons often operate in resource-poor environments. Understanding how an ancient healer managed pain and prevented infection without a single gram of synthetic antibiotic could offer clues for developing new, plant-based anesthetics or natural antiseptic protocols. Their success proves that complex medicine is possible without our vast technological infrastructure, a lesson in resilience that is more relevant than ever. This is not about replacing modern science with ancient methods, but about enriching our current knowledge with a different perspective. It reminds us that the path to healing is not one single road we built, but a vast, ancient network of trails, many of which we have yet to rediscover. The silent patient from the desert challenges us to be more humble, to look at the past not as a museum of our primitive beginnings, but as a library of forgotten genius, waiting to be read. The silent testimony of the bone could only carry the story so far. To hear the full narrative, scientists turn to a suite of technologies that read the body's hidden language. Advanced DNA sequencing acts as a molecular time machine, extracting genetic material from the mummy's teeth and dense bone tissue. This is not the dramatic process you see in films. It is a painstaking ballet conducted in sterile, climate-controlled labs to prevent any contamination from modern DNA. The goal is to reconstruct this individual's unique genetic blueprint, searching for markers of inherited diseases or predispositions to conditions that could explain his chronic pain and the necessity for such a drastic intervention. This genetic data can also trace his ancestral lineage, revealing where his family originated and if he was a native Egyptian or came from a distant land, offering clues about the transfer of medical knowledge across ancient borders. Alongside genetics, isotopic analysis deciphers the story of his life written in his teeth and bones. The principle is simple yet profound. You are what you eat, and the chemical signature of your food and water becomes locked into your skeletal tissues. By vaporizing tiny samples in a mass spectrometer, scientists can measure the ratios of different isotopes of elements like strontium, oxygen, and nitrogen. These ratios act as a lifelong dietary journal and a geographical passport. The isotopes in his tooth enamel, which forms in childhood, reveal the exact region where he grew up and the water he drank as a boy. The isotopes in his ribs, which remodel throughout adulthood, tell us what he ate in the last decade of his life. Was his diet heavy in Nile fish and barley, confirming an Egyptian upbringing? Or does it show a sudden shift to different grains, suggesting he traveled or was taken captive from another region? This data can even hint at his social status. A diet rich in meat and certain luxury foods would confirm his high position, while a more meager intake might force a re-evaluation of his story. Perhaps the most revealing technology is proteomics, the large-scale study of proteins. While DNA provides the blueprint for life, proteins are the machines that carry out its functions. They are more durable than DNA in many ancient remains, surviving for millennia. By analyzing the protein fragments still preserved in his bones and tissues, researchers can identify the specific molecules present at the time of his death. This can reveal active diseases that left no skeletal trace, like certain infections or cancers. It can detect the molecular aftermath of the surgery itself, such as proteins associated with intense inflammation and long-term healing, confirming the bodily trauma and its recovery timeline. These three technologies together, DNA, isotopes, and proteins, build a hologram of a human life. They move us beyond the question of what was done to him, and begin to answer the more profound questions of who he was, where he came from, and how his body fought for survival in a world we are only just beginning to understand. Despite the stunning evidence, this discovery opens more questions than it answers. We still do not know the identity of the healer who performed this operation. Was this individual a lone genius, a medical prodigy whose skills were never replicated, or were they part of a formal, secretive guild of surgeons whose records have been completely lost to time? The silence on this point is deafening. Another profound mystery revolves around the patient's own experience. What was his life like in the years following the surgery? Did he suffer from any lasting neurological effects, such as weakness or changes in personality? Or did he make a full and complete recovery, his only reminder a faint scar hidden beneath his hair? These are the human dimensions of the story that the bones alone cannot provide. Future research aims to shatter this silence with a new wave of scientific inquiry. The next phase involves a deeper biochemical analysis of the mummy's tissues, searching for residues of the specific herbs used in the anesthetic cocktail. Scientists hope to pinpoint not just that opium and mandrake were present, but their exact proportions, revealing the precise recipe that allowed this man to sleep through his own cranial operation. Researchers are also planning a comprehensive re-examination of other Old Kingdom mummies held in museum collections across the world. For decades, these remains were studied with a different set of questions in mind. Now, with a new template for what is possible, experts will scour existing computed tomography scans and, if permitted, conduct new high-resolution scans, looking for the telltale signs of healed surgical intervention that were previously overlooked or dismissed as damage. The ultimate goal is to find another. A single case can be an anomaly, but a second or a third would confirm a tradition. This search is a race against time, not just for this mummy, but for our understanding of human history itself. Will we find a companion for this long, silent patient, or will his story remain a solitary, brilliant, and perplexing miracle? The morning sun beat down on the whitewashed walls of a secluded courtyard, a space chosen for its clean, bright light. The air was thick with the smell of boiling herbs, a pungent mix of mandrake root and poppy, their soporific vapors already beginning to cloud the small room where the patient lay. His head had been meticulously shaved, the scalp gleaming under the oil lamps. Around him, the healer and his assistants moved with a quiet, rehearsed precision. Their tools were laid out on a clean linen cloth, a terrifying array of bow drills with obsidian tips, finely honed arsenical copper blades, and shallow bowls holding abrasive sand mixed with water. This was not a chaotic scene of desperation, but a carefully orchestrated medical event. The patient, having drunk a carefully measured cup of the potent herbal tea, was slipping into a deep, trance-like state, his breathing becoming slow and regular. The healer's first act was not with a blade, but with a steady hand, tracing the precise lines of the incision on the bare scalp with a charcoal stick, mapping the rectangle of bone that needed to be removed to relieve the mounting pressure on the man's brain. Every movement was deliberate, every action backed by a knowledge passed down through generations, a secret science of the body that would never be written on any papyrus. The first cut was swift, the copper blade parting the skin to expose the pale bone beneath. Then came the most agonizingly slow part of the operation. The bow drill was selected, its hard stone tip positioned at one corner of the charcoal mark. An assistant steadied the patient's head while the healer began a steady, rhythmic back and forth motion, applying just enough pressure to bite into the skull. The sound would have been a quiet, persistent grinding, a gritty rasp as the drill met bone, the air filling with the faint, chalky dust of calcium. This was repeated over and over, creating a series of tiny, interconnected holes that outlined the surgical window. The healer's focus was absolute, his hands unwavering as he navigated the complex terrain of the skull, his knowledge telling him exactly how deep to go, when to stop before piercing the delicate membranes protecting the brain itself. The final step was to connect these perforations using a fine copper saw or a sharp blade, carefully levering the rectangular section of bone free. At that moment, the pressure on the brain would have been released, a physical relief that, even under sedation, might have been visible as a subtle change in the patient's breathing. The wound was then cleansed with water or perhaps a mild antiseptic like wine or vinegar, before being packed with clean linen and bound tightly. The patient would sleep for many hours, perhaps even days, under the watchful eye of the healer, who now faced his second great challenge, fighting the inevitable infection and managing the long, painful road to recovery. This entire harrowing procedure, from the first sip of tea to the final bandage, was a monumental gamble against impossible odds, a testament to a healer who looked at a dying man and saw not a lost cause, but a problem that could be solved with courage, skill, and a blade. The evidence before us is a mountain that can no longer be ignored. We have a patient, alive during the age of the pyramids, who survived a complex cranial surgery. We have the healed bone, testifying to a long life after the operation. We have the tool marks, matching ancient implements and not modern ones. We have the chemical traces of sophisticated anesthetics. And we have a timeline that places this miracle 2,000 years before the birth of Hippocrates. Every piece of forensic and historical data converges on a single, inescapable conclusion. This was not magic, and it was not a fluke. It was medicine, a forgotten pinnacle of human skill that flourished in the shadow of the Sphinx and then vanished into the desert sands. This single mummy forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about our own historical narrative. We have crafted a story of steady, linear progress, but the past is far more complex, filled with peaks of achievement that were later lost. The history of healing is not a straight line from superstition to science, but a winding path with brilliant, forgotten detours. So we are left with one final, powerful question, a question that challenges the very foundations of what we think we know. Given this mountain of proof, are we, as a society of learners and thinkers, truly ready to rewrite the history books? What do you believe happened in ancient Egypt? Share your own theories in the comments below, and subscribe to join us as we continue to unravel the world's greatest historical mysteries.